Hello everybody, today we are talking about one of my favorite series, the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and how it is influenced by the Black Company. Now understand, in this series, I am not necessarily claiming exactly what Steven Erikson had in mind or didn't have in mind when he wrote the Malazan Book of the Fallen. He's been pretty open about how he likes Glenn Cook and the Black Company and that it's been influential for him in his development. But this is more my reflections, having read these, the threads that bind these two works. And by the way, Erikson did write a foreword to a Glenn Cook Black Company book, not the first one, obviously, or this reference that I have here, or version that I have here, although he did do a little blurb for it in the back. But he did a full introduction about how he came in contact with Glenn Cook, and it's very interesting. I'd recommend you read it. I'll put it in the notes, the description below. But I wanted to give you 4 particular ways that I thought these two worlds were linked. And the first one is a very obvious one, and it is how these two books focus on the story, the larger stories of like conflicts and empires and wars from the perspective of the low common soldier. Both books, both with the Malazan actual soldiers from the Malazan Empire in this series, as well as in the Black Company, they focus on particular individuals at the ground level. And this is influenced by Glenn Cook's experience in the Vietnam War, that he himself was a lowly sort of grunt that had to do the bidding of his commanding officers, who did the bidding of their commanding officers, and on until you get to the people who actually make decisions. But they don't have access to any of those people. They're just following orders. And so, especially the Black Company, and then from that, Malazan takes that perspective of not just telling us about generals or kings, but about like guys on the ground level having to actually do the killing or be the ones killed, be the fodder for the story, so to speak. And I think that's changes a lot of things and perspectives. Has an interesting moral question because these guys have less of a stake and less of choice of what they're doing than those above them, and yet they are actually the ones committing the deeds that they're commanded to do. So it's a very interesting sort of moral quandary. And this is where we can potentially find Erikson's biggest homage to the Black Company in his works in Malazan, in that the names of the Malazan soldiers and the naming conventions where they don't use their real names, but they give each other weird nicknames like Hedge or Fiddler or Whiskey Jack, Quick Ben, etc. Like all of these are not real names. It's names that they give each other sort of nicknames and sort of to leave their old identities behind. Same is true in the Black Company. The first book is about a guy named Croker, who talks a lot, and One Eye, Goblin, these sort of one-name clipped nicknames so that their identities are hid under their jobs as soldiers. And this leads to my second really close connection between these two books, what I'm calling perspectival world building. And what I mean by that is you get to know the world and everything around it from a particular perspective and only what that perspective knows. So because in the Black Company and in Malazan, you're following a lot of the lowly members of a company and an army, not necessarily the leaders of that army, or you're not in those perspectives, soldiers don't know what their generals are thinking and planning. That's what the command structure is all about. And the military organization is around compartmentalizing command. And because of that, these people don't know the ultimate aims of what they're doing. They just do what they're doing. And because of that, the reader who's reading them doesn't always know that. And for modern readers, that's sometimes frustrating, but I also think in some ways liberating and exciting and more true to character. Some writers are very heavily into explaining their world building, like, okay, so this is this, and you should know this, and these buildings, and these countries, and this way of life. Erikson and Glenn Cook is not like that. They're like, here, you're in the viewpoint of Croker, and he knows that he has to go take that wall. And so you're going to follow him take that wall. And he kind of knows that the army should take that city, but mainly he knows they have to take that wall. So what is he going to do? And you follow him. And eventually you sort of gain information a little bit about why they need to take the city or what the motivations are of the generals and the opposition, but you don't really know. And I think that makes it a very compelling story, and I think it's a more organic way to learn a world, and it feels more real to me than just like having paragraphs of explanation of things. That's my personal opinion. I definitely think Erikson is influenced by Glenn Cook in that manner. Thirdly, I'm calling this the anything goes world, because both in Malazan and in Black Company, just crazy shit happens and they just say it and move on. Like in the second book in the Black Company, there's literally flying whales just like thrown out there, and that's it. Like not like a huge thing like, oh yeah, there's a whale that's flying. Just like in Gardens of the Moon or Malazan in general, like there's just like, oh yeah, dragons over there. Yeah, sorcery. Or yeah, dinosaurs with swords. Like shit just happens. It's crazy. But yeah, it's just happening. And that's just, the world. Both of these books do that, and I love that. Why are you reading fantasy if you're not for crazy stuff just happening out of nowhere? Finally, and this is a little bit of a deeper point, but both Black Company and Malazan as a whole, I'm holding Guardians of the Moon as a stand-in, obviously, focus on the really interesting idea that an individual's idea of their history and history as a whole, what they've learned of history, forms their perceived reality in a real and sometimes terrifying way. The Black Company books are always told from the perspective of the analyst of the Black Company, not like the person who tells the story of the company. So a historian, really, of the companies themselves. And so the idea of history is very ingrained in these ideas, and oftentimes, at least in the Black Company books that I have read, Croker, the only books that I have read, struggles with the history that he's learned, if it's real or not, and how that changes how they perceive if they're on the right side of things or not, if they're doing the right thing, what is moral, what is not, where to fight. Malazan does the same thing. How people view their history, who they think the bad people are, who they think were victorious, shapes what they think is right and what they think is wrong. And if you take that history away or change it slightly, that changes things. And it shows the fragility of what we think of as reality and what we think of as morality. And that's scary, but that is a true thing that we have tensions in. Now, in these books, the question is the Dominator who resurrected these necromantic sorcerers actually as bad as the lady? Are they different? Are they the same? Should we be fighting for them or maybe the rebels? Or are the rebels bad? Or in Malazan, it's, are the millennia old Tisti Andi and Tisti Eder like race wars? Who started it? And how does that work itself out on the current world? I'm obviously like, these are crazy things that wouldn't happen in our world, but they're reflections on real things like colonialism. Was it actually, industrial revolution that changed it, and ingenuity on the Western standpoint, or the abuse of labor and stealing of wealth from the colonies themselves that allowed us being Western culture to sort of pervade globally? And is that a good thing or is that sin? Like, these are history things that once you learn changes your perceptions of what is real, what is right, what is moral. And I think that's really important, and I think something that fantasy that takes these things to heightened degrees can do a really good job of explaining. So there we go. Some overlap between Malazan and Black Company. I'm hoping to do these. Obviously, Malazan is one of my favorite books of all time. And as I read different works, I want to talk about how they reflect on this sort of magnum opus and what I think the pinnacle of fantasy is. So thanks for joining me. Check out the Patreon if you haven't already. And also pick up Black Company if you haven't. I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you've already picked up Malazan. If you haven't and you really appreciate Malazan, pick up Black Company. Really worth it. As always, first in, last out.